Good day. Welcome to Lambert Creative Media and our latest video podcast. So great to have you with us. My name is Colin Lambert. I'm founder and president of Lambert Creative Media. And as often as we can, we want to bring you stories, offers of hope, offers of healing, ways to get connected with others and with yourself. And I think it is something that continues to be in our community and in our world, something that's needed more than ever. And so, as we talk about those things that affect us and affect our lives and affect those that love us and that we love, I think it's always important for us to have these conversations and to share with each other and to learn from each other. I'll tell you, every time I interview somebody, every time I talk to somebody about their area of expertise or something that they're dealing with, I learn something myself. So if you don't learn a thing from these things, I'm going to learn myself. But my hope, my thought in and my desire is that we all learn together through some of these conversations that we have here at Lambert Creative Media. I do want to encourage you just before we get to our guest today to subscribe to my YouTube channel. It is a way to get notified anytime something's coming up so you know when those things are coming. And of course, share as you hear something that might be applicable to yourself or a friend or a loved one. Share these with other people. I think it makes an incredible difference in the lives of people around you. And I just want to encourage you to do that. So subscribe, share, and of course, if you want to like it, that's awesome as well. Just so grateful that you've taken a few minutes to be with us today. I am thrilled to have our guest today because as I look at our culture, as I look at the news today, what I hear and what I see is just increasing levels of violence, anger, hostility. And so much of that comes from uh, challenges as we are raised, trauma, things that have been done to us, things we've done to others, unforgiveness, all those kinds of things begin to affect our lives and through that affect others as well. We've seen shootings recently all across the country motivated by who knows what yet. We are not even totally sure. Some by hate, some by loneliness, some just by anger, possibly. There's so much to it, and we want to dive into that a little bit today. And more importantly, by the end of the program today, what we really want to do is get to the place where we ourselves can understand what is my next step? What can I do to be a part of the solution as well? I am thrilled today to have with me someone that comes highly recommended. I've had on my program Hannah Lynn Miller. She's a young blogger, and she said, "You've got to get this lady on." And a friend of mine, Junie Felix, who I'm going to have on in a short time as well on the program, she said, "You've got to have this lady on. She's incredible." So I wanted to make sure to do that, and I'm doing that today. Jocelyn Jones is a counselor, an author, an entrepreneur. She is founder and leader of Faith on the Journey. She's written a great book called Breaking the Power of the Mask. And Jocelyn, it is so great to have you with me today. Thanks for your time. I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Colin. I'm excited to be here.
Let's start with just a little bit, maybe a foundation about trauma. We hear so much today about people who have issues from their backgrounds. I come from maybe the latter part of a generation where my parents were the greatest generation. They were the ones that fought the world wars and Vietnam and Korea, and they came through the Depression and hard times. And for my parents, I looked at them and their thing was just, suck it up. You just, times are tough and you just got to get out there and do it. So I think I've got a bit of that in me. I think the younger generations, though, have found a world that has been super accepting of all the challenges they're facing and helping them deal with those challenges when maybe some of us and my generation, our generation, just kind of push those things aside. So as we begin, maybe let's lay a foundation of what trauma is and how maybe it differs from just a standard day-to-day challenge that a person might face.
Yes, Colin, that's a good question. To try to simplify it, trauma is a deep wound of the heart that lasts a long time. It's something that takes place that we experience that leaves us feeling helpless, causing great fear and horror. And it's a feeling like there's nothing that we can do to stop it. It's something that can take place by a single event, a prolonged event, a repeated event. And it's something where it can wreak havoc in our lives. It can cause us to struggle with our relationship with others, how we see self, how we see God. And it's something that when someone experiences a traumatic event, they can feel like they're no longer the same person, which is why it's important for people to get help when they've experienced trauma. And it's different than possibly just having a bad day, as you described, or going through a difficult situation. Sometimes we have challenges in our life, but when we feel like we have no agency in the situation, we feel helpless, it's causing great fear, it does something to us. And usually that is a sign that you might have experienced a traumatic event.
Maybe just, and I know everybody is different and every scenario is different, but maybe just a few examples of what some people might consider trauma. I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is someone who's been in the Army or Navy, Air Force, Marines, who's been in battle. They have faced some type of trauma, PTSD from that experience. What other types of things have you seen in your experience that might fit into that category?
Yeah, that's a good example, Colin. Addition to what you described, as we think sometimes overseas at war, we actually have war taking place in many of our communities as it relates to gun violence. You and I were talking backstage about how we're seeing mass shootings all over the place. And even if you weren't there at the scene of the crime, you can experience secondary trauma by hearing the stories of other people who've experienced such horrific moments, right? And so seeing that definitely does something to us, and we're taking this in day by day. But in addition to that, it can happen in a personal level when it comes to domestic violence, abuse, sexual assault. Those are things that are definitely traumatic events. We see natural disasters, a car accident, can be traumatic for someone. And I think one point I like to make is we are different, all of us. So we can go through the same experience, and some of us, the traumatic response can almost be paralyzing for us. Other people, it might not affect them the same way, and it is so many variables that can cause someone to respond differently. Whether it's their support system, whether they were pre-exposed to trauma as a child, and so it's magnified. Whether they have a mental illness, there's a number of factors that can contribute to how someone responds to a very difficult event. But I think that's why it's important for us to look at everyone as unique individuals and their needs being all different, because each of us respond differently to the things that we experience.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned was this we all deal with challenges, we all deal with struggles. Probably most of us, if we've experienced any of the years of life, have experienced some trauma.
Yeah.
I think part of what you said just a few moments ago was that in some of our cases or in some specific situations, it gets to the point that it's overwhelming, that it just becomes too much to handle. In other words, there are some mechanisms we have built in, some of our natural programming that allows us to deal with some of those things. But where we're talking about possibly someone needing help is where it just begins to go beyond that. Could be as simple as just needing to someone to talk to, I assume, or it could be somebody who needs some real therapy over time. Talk for a moment about recognizing trauma in your own life. How do I know when it's time to say, I think I might need some help in this situation?
That's a really good question. I think that sometimes we do struggle to even recognize the fact that we've experienced trauma and how it's playing out in our lives. The example that you shared earlier about how your parents' generation, how they dealt with things, is this understanding that you're supposed to be strong, just push through. From a faith perspective, people often turn to, well, God will bring us through, just pray about it. And I believe as a minister, prayer is important. However, sometimes we still need additional help. And when we have unresolved trauma in our lives, it's something that doesn't just go away. You can't just close your eyes and act like it didn't happen, because it's there and it can start impacting our behavior in ways in which we don't even realize why we're acting a certain way. We might find ourselves being angry all the time, closed off. We might find ourselves at some point listening to a song or hearing a reminder of something that takes us back to that traumatic moment. And we have a response that surprises ourselves because we didn't realize how those events affected us. And so I tell people, I personally believe everyone needs a counselor. Everyone needs to be on someone's couch to work through some of the experiences that we've had, because if you're living in today's world, I mean, we think back to 2020, that particular year in itself, I said everybody has experienced some sort of trauma, and
Yeah.
we all need space to kind of work through it. And it's time out for this mask of strength, this persona that we feel like we always have to have it all together when the world is crumbling around us. And so, if we can be authentic around conversations to say, I am struggling with this issue. It hurts me to see children being gunned down in the streets, or I had this happen to me in my past and it's still burdening me, and not feeling ashamed about the fact that we feel. I think sometimes these emotions that we have come up in us, we're not used to allowing them to be expressed. I talk often about how there's been times in my life where I apologized for crying. What sense does that make? But it's a
Yeah.
conditioning that we have to think that
Right.
it's a sign of weakness when honestly there's healing in the tears.
Yeah.
And so learning that we have to actually unlearn some things that we were taught around expressing our emotions, about the need to project a certain image of ourselves, because all that is standing in the way of the healing that we need in our lives. And healing begins through community. Healing begins through being honest with oneself about the needs that we have and the fact that we are hurting.
Yeah. You use the word mask. I want to talk about that for a moment because I kind of have a personal connection to that. There's a television commercial most people have probably seen. I can't remember what drug it's for, but you'll see the lady who goes into a party situation and she's got this mask, and on one side is a smile and the other side is a frown. And based on how she's feeling, she kind of uses that. I've got a family member that we often will be asking how they're doing, because they've been going through counseling. And it's like, do you have the mask up or do you not have the mask up? And they're like, I've got the mask up, or no, no mask. This is really how I'm feeling, and you've actually written a book about it, which I think it's breaking the power of the mask. And obviously you have seen that part of this challenge is just being willing to pull that mask off and to have that challenging conversation, to share, to dig deeper, talk for a moment maybe about a couple of these masks that we'll put on ourselves.
Yeah, well, one I'm very familiar with outside of the mask of strength is the mask of perfection. Not allowing people to see my flaws, feeling like my value came in my performance. That's something that's very common with people who have some insecurities, place their value in the wrong thing, which is what other people think about them. And so that's the mask that I have worn. I've called myself a recovering perfectionist. In addition to that, I talk about a martyr mask, one who you might see this in church, in a church setting where someone's always there, volunteering all the time, always giving them of themselves, but doesn't have boundaries. It's kind of like one of those things where if you think of someone who is overcommitted and it gives the church everything in the ministry setting and has no life, and so they're covering up something when you're not able to actually sit down and actually have that balance, right? And so there's a lot of masks that people wear. Sometimes people use or wear the comedic mask, where they joke away their pain and they make everyone else laugh, but they're crying inside. And so it just depends on what you use as a facade to hide how you're really feeling. That's really what the mask is. It's the facade that we project to the world so we can hide what's really going on inside. And people have their mask of choice.
Yeah. I think we all do. I think we can all identify with that. So, as we begin to maybe come to a place in our life where we feel like we have experienced some trauma, or maybe there's something that is just beyond what we feel like we can handle ourselves. And maybe just before I get to this, I want to back up. One of the challenges I know personally and from family situations, when trauma begins to impact people's lives in a deep way, it literally can be debilitating. It can keep you from your job. It can keep you from growth. It can keep you from your family. There are so many things it can keep you from. Talk for a moment about, again, maybe some of those reasons like that, why it's important to begin to make a move toward healing.
Yeah, you nailed it. It can really paralyze every area of your life, and you don't want it to get to that point. And sometimes I've talked to people who they said they can't focus in school, they can't do basic tasks anymore, and they're questioning what's going on. They almost feel like they're going crazy, right? And I have to ensure people you're not losing your mind. You've experienced some trauma. You've experienced some grief and loss. And this is something that you never were meant to do this or go through this journey by yourself. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to say you need some help. There's people in your life who want to walk alongside of you, and this is the time. I think that one thing that we can do when we talk about the mask, I also was a workaholic. We can throw ourselves into other things to distract ourselves. And in doing so, we're doing ourselves a disservice. I think it's okay to have a distraction here and there when it becomes overwhelming to deal with the emotion. But if you're constantly running from self, you can't outrun yourself.
Yeah.
And so at some point, I think going back to your question, Colin, it's time, but it's scary. It's scary to remove the mask. It's scary to deal with the pain. In order to heal, you have to hurt. And people don't want that. You have to feel those emotions. But if you do it in a safe environment, if you do it in the company of a great counselor, if you do this with your pastor, if you do it with loved ones, is not as scary. And also just knowing that God is with you through all of this, right? God's called us to experience his healing. So, in that, taking that first brave, courageous step is huge. And I think that first step is just acknowledging that you're not okay and you need some help.
Yeah. I know that there's probably going to be people watching this who are experiencing already feeling some of these. Yeah, I can identify with what they're saying. I'm experiencing that. I can't get to work. I can't get out of the house. I can't interact with my loved ones. Whatever those things are that they might be experiencing, even as they're watching this. Um, I'd like for you to talk to them about maybe some of those first steps. How do we begin to get the help we need when we know that we just can't do it ourselves?
Yeah, my hope is that those who are listening and who they're finding themselves in this situation, there's at least one person in your life that you feel safe with. And, sometimes that could be a spouse, sometimes that could be a parent. If it's not that, then maybe you go outside your family. Sometimes, unfortunately, the family could be the one that caused the trauma. In that case, maybe look at a pastor or go online, reach out and find, maybe it's a support group in the area that you've experienced trauma, or look and see if you can make an appointment with a counselor. There's free counseling out there if it's something that you feel like you can't afford. But finding the one place in which you can actually share your story and be heard, listened to without judgment. That's huge because many of us are afraid of sharing our sacred story because in that the emotions will come back to surface and we don't know how we'll respond. We might not have it all together in that moment. But letting people see us at a place of being vulnerable and hold us in our pain, that's something that helps to begin that healing process, because once you're able to share your story, then you can begin to start unpacking how the trauma and those events in your life have been affecting you. And they no longer have to, over the long term, as you continue working through some of these issues of trauma, have to control your life. When you haven't dealt with the issues of trauma, it's almost as if you're feeling like you're in captivity. And that's a terrible place to feel like when you're in bondage. And so the first step, Colin, whether it's all those people I mentioned, pastor, loved one, friend, is to share your story. Find a safe place to do so, because it is important to find a safe place. And then be gracious with yourself, understanding that healing is a process. It does not happen overnight.
Yeah.
It's a journey. And so in that, if you're kind to yourself as you're working through some of those painful events, knowing that at some point you will experience joy again. The trauma that you experience won't necessarily always have a hold on you, but it takes work and you're worth the work.
You mentioned that people are different. I assume that that means, and you've even referenced some of this, that means that different people are going to respond to different types of opportunities for healing. Someone may do better with a minister, some with a counselor, some with a group therapy type situation. But to me, it sounds like with all of these, you're saying you have to get started. You have to take that first step. You have to, as hard as it might be, you have to trust somebody to share that story.
Yes. Oh, yes, and it's hard, Colin. It's hard because many of us, we might not have had the greatest experiences with sharing in the past, and we might have been told exactly what you were talking about earlier, that, you need to present yourself a certain way. You need to be strong. You don't air your dirty laundry outside. What happens in this house stays in this house. You know the stories, right? And so when you've been raised to think that way and to think that in being vulnerable is a sign of weakness, or crying, or saying that you're having a hard time in your faith is a sign that you're not a strong believer or a good Christian, whatever. There's a lot of things that we've learned that have been a hindrance to us in our healing. And so it does take a lot of courage, but I'm telling you, when you are at a place where you finally do begin to open up and share in safe communities, it's going to be worth it.
I know that you're a minister, and I know that you deal with churches related to this topic of trauma. Again, it seems like over the years, churches have been very far behind in dealing with some issues like mental health issues, with opportunities for healing, maybe more so. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, when recovery programs began actually coming into the church. But talk for a moment about the importance of the church being engaged in something that probably is affecting a third or a fourth or a half of their congregation sitting in the pews.
I would wager it'd be more than half, Colin. I think most people have affected in some type of way with trauma, and I think it's important for churches to acknowledge that. Now is the time. I mean, look at what's happening in the world, to say that people are looking for hope, people are looking for healing. So wouldn't the church want to be a place to be a trauma healing church, a trauma healing community? And that doesn't necessarily mean that the church has to have a full-blown counseling program, but it does mean that the church needs to acknowledge that this is happening in their church, and they need to take steps to at least create environments to begin to bridge the gap for people who are looking for additional support. So, for example, when I'm working with churches, I'm saying, hey, can you at least have a committee that is prepared when someone experiences trauma to do a warm handoff to a counselor who is, prepared to support that person? Or maybe you can have what we describe as trauma healing groups. My company trains people on how to facilitate groups. That's something that you can go through a quick training and begin to create groups in your church that at least allows people to have those conversations. And that's a small step that you can take. And I also think it's important for pastors to acknowledge the trauma through sermons, to talk about it, because sometimes people need to see that the pastor is okay with talking about mental health and some of the struggles that they face, because sometimes we have a skewed understanding of our pastor as if they're
Mhm.
superhuman and don't hurt either, and that's not the truth, right? And so when the pastor can be honest about that, that can really help this other people in the pews to say, oh, okay, we can talk about this. And then one other thing that I encourage churches to do is to create spaces for lament. We read about lament throughout the Bible. And lament is actually an act of faith when we're able to come to our God and cry out and say, God, we're hurting. What we're seeing in this world is not right. And so giving space, whether it's maybe setting some time after worship for people to cry out and lament, is giving people community to grieve, to talk about and express the emotions that they're feeling.
You have a website set up I think is going to be helpful to many people. It's called faithonthejourney.org. Tell us a little bit about what people can find here.
Sure thing. Yeah. So you can find information about our Christian counseling services. So I have a team of Christian counselors who specialize in Bible based trauma informed care and grief counseling. And so if you're looking for a Christian counselor to help you through to work through some of those events that you've experienced in your life that were painful, you can find information about our counselors. You can also learn more about our trauma healing groups that I was just referencing, which are essentially Bible studies to help you to begin your trauma healing journey. Sometimes meeting with other believers and having a small group setting where you can begin to share and be heard can really help you to begin that healing process. And so we actually have some groups coming up. So I encourage you to check that out. And then we have a bunch of free resources, including my podcast and, other blogs and tools to really help you to begin that journey. So take advantage of it, check it out. I'm sure you'll be blessed by what's on our website.
I believe so. One other thought, we've talked a bit about how we, as the person we're talking about, might make that first step to get engaged, to begin to have those conversations, to begin that healing process. What if we have a loved one who we know has experienced trauma, who we can see is facing some of these challenges, some of that stealing up, just not even being willing to take that next step forward in their life. It's just keeping them bound. How do we thoughtfully, carefully, yet specifically reach out to a person that may be a loved one or someone close to us who's dealing with those challenges and encourage them to take that step?
Yeah, that's hard. I encourage people to be very prayerful because sometimes acknowledging that you need help can be very difficult for an individual. But one thing that you can do that could be a really helpful first step is saying, "Hey, uh, I heard about, for example, this group, this trauma healing group, and I'm interested in checking it out. Would you check it out with me?" That way, it is something where sometimes people do something for someone else. And so maybe making that step with the person to go to a group, go to a workshop, go to a seminar, or talk to a pastor with them, along with praying for them. That can really help to move that person forward to make that first step. But we have to understand that it's a personal choice. We can't force anybody, but sometimes walking with them can help move them along.
Well, Jocelyn, this has been a great opportunity to kind of lay a foundation for trauma, what people are experiencing, what kind of things qualify as trauma, how we begin to take moves to deal with our own trauma, and how we can, as you just talked about, help others, and even how the church can get engaged with helping folks deal with trauma. All so important in today's culture. As you look around and see what's happening in our culture, it's obvious that people need this kind of help. They need this kind of healing. And I believe often, if it's done and done well and done in time, so many of the tragedies that we see in our culture today could be avoided. And just in general, I think our relationships ultimately could be better with those around us if we can take care of some of that healing that we need ourselves. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been so great to have you with us. And I want to remind everybody, the website is faithonthejourney.org. That's faithonthejourney.org. The book is Breaking the Power of the Mask. And so appreciative to have Jocelyn Jones on with us today. Hope we can have you back sometime and talk more about these opportunities for healing.
Thank you so much, Colin.
Great to have you. Jocelyn Jones, again, faithonthejourney.org, and the book, Breaking the Power of the Mask. So great to have you with me today. I'm so appreciative of every time you take a moment to stop by. Again, I just want to encourage you, as you heard the topic today, this may be something you're dealing with. Boy, I want to urge you to find that person to go talk to. Find somebody that you can begin to share that story with and begin to get healing. If you know somebody who is dealing with something like this today, I want to urge you to speak to them prayerfully, as Jocelyn said. Speak to them, encourage them to start sharing that story. And again, if you need just some thoughts about getting started, Jocelyn's website can be super helpful, whether you're a church or an individual. Faithonthejourney.org. That's faithonthejourney.org. So grateful to have you with me today. We'll see you next time. I'm Colin Lambert for Lambert Creative Media. Please subscribe and share, and we'll see you next time.